Welcome to the Nonfiction Insights channel. Today we're diving deep into James Nestor's book, Breath, The New Science of a Lost Art.
Yeah, this is a fascinating one.
It really is. You asked us to explore this because you're curious about how something as automatic as breathing can have such a huge impact on our health.
Absolutely. It seems so basic. And what's truly compelling about Nestor's work, I think, is how he takes the seemingly simple act, breathing, and just reveals all these layers of surprising science and ancient wisdom. It really makes you rethink something you do, 20,000 times a day without even thinking about it?
Exactly. He takes us on this journey connecting ancient practices with modern research to show how our breathing affects, well, pretty much everything. Our physical health, athletic performance, even mental clarity, and weirdly enough, the shape of our faces.
That part's wild.
It is. So we're going to try and break down some of these more complex ideas simply, sort of like we're explaining it fresh just to make sure we really get the key takeaways.
Okay, but it does beg the question, though. If breathing is so fundamental, so automatic, why do we need a whole book about how to do it right? I mean, what's gone wrong?
Yeah, that's a great question. Let's unpack that. Nestor starts by pointing out something quite surprising. Modern humans, he argues, are among the worst breathers in the animal kingdom.
Worst. How so?
Well, he kicks things off with his own story. He signed up for a breathing class, expecting it to be easy, right?
Right.
But he was sweating bucket just from an hour of focused inhales and exhales. It was intense. And this personal experience gets him started exploring this seemingly lost art.
Okay.
So when he says worst breathers, he's kind of suggesting that our modern lifestyles have somehow messed with this basic function, made us less good at it than we should be.
That personal anecdote definitely grabs you. But, it makes you wonder, what specific things about modern life? Is it our environment, our food, our stress? What is it?
That's exactly the rabbit hole Nestor goes down.
Yeah.
And the first really big idea he tackles is the crucial importance of breathing through your nose. He even did this experiment on himself where he temporarily blocked his nose for 10 days.
What happened?
Oh, it was bad. He felt terrible almost immediately. Snoring, sleep apnea symptoms, high blood pressure, just awful. And he contrasts this with how Western medicine historically kind of saw the nose as, well, almost ancillary, like just a spare airway. Unlike ancient traditions, which really got how vital the nose is.
Quite a contrast, isn't it? This idea that the nose was almost an afterthought in modern medicine, while these ancient cultures saw it as absolutely key. What did they understand that maybe we forgot?
Well, they saw breath, prana, or chi as deeply tied to our life force, our energy. You find ancient texts, like from China and India, centuries old, detailing specific practices, ways to regulate breath, to boost health, vitality, even longevity. It was spiritual, too.
So it wasn't just about the mechanics of getting air in. There was this energetic component as well. How does Nestor bridge that ancient wisdom with modern science on nasal breathing?
He breaks down the actual mechanics. Your nose, it's like this amazing built-in filter and humidifier.
Right.
It warms, cleans, and moistens the air before it even hits your lungs. This makes oxygen absorption way more efficient.
And the structure inside, the turbinates.
Exactly. Those turbinates create this huge surface area. It's like your body's own little high-tech air conditioning unit doing all this crucial work, way more than just a hole in your face.
It's fascinating when you visualize that, how intricate it is.
Totally. And then he brings in modern research backing up the downsides of mouth breathing. Some pretty eye-opening examples.
Like,
Well, there's this case of a teenager who ate mostly soft processed food. His mouth and jaw didn't develop properly, leading to crowded teeth and, crucially, breathing problems.
wow, so the food texture actually affected his airway development.
Apparently so.
Yeah.
It shows how diet connects to structure, which connects to breathing. It's all linked.
That's a powerful connection. Really underscores the long-term impact of habitually breathing through the mouth.
He also mentioned studies on rats, where being forced to mouth breathe led to fewer brain cells developing and trouble with learning tasks.
On rats, okay.
And in humans, there's research linking mouth breathing to poorer oxygen delivery to the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain for focus, attention, potentially relevant for things like ADHD, maybe.
That cognitive link is really striking. So it's not just physical health, it's directly impacting our mental capacity too. It's like this cascade effect.
Right. Then Nestor introduces an orthodontist, Dr. Mariana Evans. She studied skulls, ancient and modern.
And what did she find?
Her research suggests our airway health has actually declined over time,
Yeah.
possibly due to diet changes, but also something she calls disevolution.
Disevolution, what's that?
It's the idea that maybe we're passing down less beneficial traits, like our jaws getting smaller, airways narrower, almost evolving in that sense.
Ugh. That's a really provocative concept. Not all change is progress, basically.
Exactly. She contrasts this with, say, our ancestors on the savannah, whose noses were shaped for optimal scent detection, or how nose shapes adapted to climate.
Okay.
Then he shares these ethically, maybe questionable now, but interesting experiments on monkeys from decades ago. They forced rhesus monkeys to breathe only through their mouths.
Oh.
They developed longer faces, sort of downward growth, narrow dental arches, crooked teeth, basically mirroring many of the issues seen in modern humans who are chronic mouth breathers.
Wow, that's a stark visual. Unsettling, but it really drives the point home how breathing patterns can physically reshape us.
And finally, on this point, he discusses sleep research. Dr. Christian Guillemino linked mouth breathing and snoring in kids to all sorts of problems, mood disorders, blood pressure issues, even learning difficulties.
So it really hits home the importance of breathing right, especially during sleep. Prioritizing nasal breathing seems key. Okay, so let's move to the second big idea. The power of the exhale and, maybe surprisingly, breathing less.
Right. So it's not just about the inhale. He talks about the diaphragm, that big muscle under the lungs, and what he calls the thoracic pump. How deep diaphragmatic breathing actually helps with circulation.
How does that work?
Well, the deep inhale helps draw blood into the heart, and the full exhale helps push it out. It's assisting the cardiovascular system. It's not just gas exchange. It's mechanical help for blood flow.
That link between breath and circulation is really important. It's a bigger system.
Definitely. Nestor then discusses Ethel Willis stuff. She worked with emphysema patients back in the mid-20th century.
Right, I remember reading about her.
She showed how retraining them to breathe deeply, using their diaphragm properly, could significantly improve their condition. Her breathing coordination technique aimed to restore that natural rhythm between breathing and circulation.
What's fascinating is that she also worked with the Yale track and field team, elite athletes.
Yeah, and she found that even they often had inefficient breathing habits, like breathing too high up in their chests, very shallowly.
It's kind of mind-blowing, isn't it, that even top athletes might not be breathing optimally. It suggests it's not automatic, even if you're fit.
Exactly. It's a skill or an art that needs attention.
Which leads us to carbon dioxide, CO2. We usually think of it as just waste, right? Something to exhale and get rid of.
Totally. But Nestor explains it's actually vital, especially for oxygen delivery.
Okay, how?
He explains the Bohr effect. Basically, CO2 is needed to help oxygen detach from hemoglobin in our red blood cells and actually get into our tissues and organs where it's used.
Ah, so CO2 is like the key that unlocks the oxygen from the delivery truck, the hemoglobin.
That's a great analogy. Yeah.
Yeah.
So the takeaway isn't just getting more oxygen in, it's making sure our body can use it effectively. And CO2 is crucial for that last step.
Right. So if we breathe too heavily, too fast, what happens?
We blow off too much CO2. And paradoxically, this can lead to less oxygen actually reaching our cells, even if we're taking huge breaths.
So hyperventilating doesn't necessarily mean more oxygen gets used?
Exactly. He even mentions experiments where inhaling pure oxygen didn't provide extra benefit if CO2 levels were too low. It challenges that whole more oxygen is always better idea.
It underscores that it's the balance of gases that matters, particularly having enough CO2.
And he notes that our average breathing rates seem to have increased in modern times, maybe linked to stress, diet, lifestyle. Then he introduces Konstantin Buteyko, a Russian doctor with some fairly radical ideas.
Buteyko, yeah. His theory was that overbreathing, chronic hyperventilation, is the root cause of many diseases.
Pretty much. His method, sometimes called voluntary elimination of deep breathing, sounds counterintuitive.
Definitely. Breathe less.
Yeah, it's a form of hypoventilation training. The goal is to gently increase the body's tolerance to CO2, retrain the breathing center in the brain.
So the core idea is that chronic, maybe even subtle overbreathing messes up the CO2 balance, disrupting body functions, including oxygen delivery, and breathing less helps restore that balance.
Right. Nestor shares anecdotes like the Czech runner Emil Zatopek. Apparently he used intense breath-holding techniques as part of his training.
Zatopek, yeah, his training was legendary, borderline crazy, but effective. It highlights how manipulating breath could potentially push physical limits.
And Nestor also points to more recent research, like Dr. Alicia Murray's work with asthma.
What did she find?
She found that training asthma patients to breathe less could actually alleviate their symptoms. She described it as correcting a kind of biological system error related to their tendency to hyperventilate.
That's significant. A potential non-drug approach based on correcting the breathing pattern itself. It really reinforces that idea. Sometimes less is more with breathing.
Okay, so moving on to our third key area. The actual breathing techniques Nestor explores. This is where it gets really practical.
Right. Things people can actually try.
Exactly. He talks a lot about slow breathing, techniques like resonant breathing or coherent breathing.
What's the rhythm for that?
It's typically around 5.5 seconds for the inhale and 5.5 seconds for the exhale. So about 5 or 6 breaths per minute.
That's quite slow compared to normal unconscious breathing.
It is. And Nestor explains how breathing at this specific slow rhythm can promote calmness. It seems to synchronize the heart, lungs, and circulation. Creates coherence in the system.
And he links this to ancient practices.
Yeah, interestingly, that 5.5-second rhythm mirrors the pace of chanting prayers like the rosary or certain Buddhist mantras. Suggests there might be ancient wisdom embedded in these rhythms.
That synchronization is fascinating, tying physiology to these long-standing traditions. Good for stress reduction, maybe.
Seems likely. He also revisits breathing coordination exercises, like from Ethel Stuff, focusing on really engaging the diaphragm, counting aloud on the inhale, then silently on a longer exhale.
Right, practical ways to cultivate that deeper, more efficient pattern.
He also touches on something called nasal cycle dominance.
What's that?
It's the idea that our nostrils naturally tend to alternate which one is more dominant, more open throughout the day. Apparently, this was recognized in ancient Indian traditions, like Shiva Swaradhaya.
Oh, so even our nostrils have a rhythm, another layer to nasal breathing.
Yeah, and he mentions the 5 Tibetan rites exercises that synchronize specific movements with breath, said to expand lung capacity, maybe even extend lifespan.
Okay. Then he gets into mouth taping. That sounds interesting.
Literally putting a small piece of special tape over your lips at night.
Why?
To gently encourage nasal breathing during sleep, to combat snoring, maybe mild sleep apnea. He brings in George Catlin, an artist who traveled among Native American tribes in the 1800s.
And Catlin observed.
He observed that tribes who consistently breathe through their noses, mothers even gently closing their babies' mouths, seem to have remarkably good health and facial structure. Early anecdotal evidence, basically.
Mouth taping might sound a bit extreme, but those historical accounts and potential benefits for sleep, it's compelling.
And finally, in this technique section, Nestor explores more intense practices. Things like inner fire meditation or Tummo.
Wim Hof territory.
Exactly. And holotropic breathwork. These involve periods of rapid, heavy breathing.
Why would you do that? It sounds like the opposite of breathing less.
Well, the idea is to intentionally stress the body in a controlled way, potentially influencing the autonomic nervous system, inducing altered states, maybe even impacting inflammation or immunity. He mentions Wim Hof's work and some anecdotal reports of improvements in autoimmune conditions.
But with caveats, right?
Oh yeah, he definitely emphasizes responsible practice. These are powerful techniques. He also briefly mentions Stanislav Grof's holotropic breathwork, developed for accessing non-ordinary states of consciousness.
So a whole spectrum of techniques, from very gentle, slow breathing to quite intense practices affecting mind and body. But caution is needed for the intense stuff.
Definitely. Okay, our final key idea connects breathing back to diet and facial structure.
Right. This was another really eye-opening part of the book.
Yeah, Nestor really digs into the link between our modern diets, soft processed foods, and how they might lead to underdeveloped mouths and jaws, which in turn obstructs airways.
He brings in Weston Price's work here, doesn't he?
He does. Price, the dentist who traveled the world in the 1930s, comparing traditional diets to modern ones.
And he found
that people eating traditional, often tougher, more nutrient-dense diets tended to have broader faces, well-aligned teeth, and wider airways compared to those on modern, refined diets.
Price's work was groundbreaking, showing how nutrition shapes our physical structure, and Nestor really applies that lens to the mouth and airway.
Then he talks about orthodontics, both historical approaches.
Like expanding devices from Kingsley and Robin.
Right, aimed at opening airways. And also contemporary methods like BioBlock and HomeoBlock, again focused on expanding the palate and improving breathing, not just straightening teeth.
It shows a shift in orthodontics, or at least a growing awareness, recognizing the airway as critical.
And he highlights Dr. John Yu, who's quite controversial but influential.
Yu. He argues against extractions and retractive orthodontics.
Yeah. He believes they can sometimes narrow the airway. He champions orthotropics and emphasizes oral posture.
Oral posture, what's that again?
Lips together, teeth lightly touching, and tongue resting gently on the roof of the mouth. He sees this as fundamental for proper facial development and open airways.
That seems simple, but maybe powerful if done consistently, a daily practice.
Could be. Nestor also mentions Dr. Kevin Belfour and the HomeoBlock device.
What does that do?
It's designed to stimulate bone growth in the upper jaw, kind of mimicking the effects of chewing tougher foods to expand the palate and airway. Nestor includes some compelling before and after scans showing increased airway space.
Wow, and he notes this chew-airway connection isn't new.
Right. He mentions James Wallace writing about it over a century ago, how lack of vigorous chewing impacts jaw development. It really underscores how maybe our modern soft diets play a role.
Okay, so wrapping things up, Nestor offers some critical review and final thoughts.
He does. He's enthusiastic, but also grounded. He acknowledges that breathing practices, while often beneficial, aren't a cure-all. They have limits. He even shares a cautionary story about someone overdoing a technique and having a bad experience.
That balance is important, acknowledging potential risks, too.
He really hammers home the idea that breathing is a crucial, missing killer of health, as important as diet and exercise, but often overlooked. And he recaps the potential downsides of chronic mouth breathing, sinus issues, blood pressure, poor sleep, fatigue, maybe cognitive stuff.
And the purpose of those occasional intense breathing sessions, like Tummo.
He explains it as a way to apply controlled acute stress, like exercise does, to potentially make the autonomic nervous system more resilient and adaptable.
Interesting. A hormetic effect, maybe?
Could be. He also touches on brain science, the link between the amygdala, our fear centers, and breathing control. It highlights how tightly our emotional state and breathing are connected.
That mind-body connection again. Deeply intertwined.
Absolutely. And ultimately, the book concludes with a pretty simple, powerful message. While the science is still evolving, there's a strong consensus emerging. We need to breathe better.
And better generally means?
Primarily through the nose.
Yeah.
More slowly, and often less volume than we typically do.
Nose, slow, low. That simple message really captures the core takeaway, just bringing conscious awareness to this unconscious process.
Exactly. Small adjustments, potentially big impacts. So you can see this dive into breath shows how something we do thousands of times a day holds incredible power over our well-being.
Yeah, from just closing your mouth to trying specific techniques, how we breathe really matters. The book itself goes into way more detail, of course. Lots more studies and history if you're curious.
Definitely worth checking out if this sparked your interest.
So the provocative thought we want to leave you with is this. Considering how modern life often pushes us towards shallow, fast mouth breathing, what one small conscious adjustment could you start making today? How could you tap into this lost art and see what benefits might unfold for your own health and mind?
Something to think about. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into breath. Please subscribe to the Nonfiction Insights channel for more explorations of fascinating and insightful books.